passingly about a man named Shakespeare. I only read about him passingly, but I remember one thing he wrote that kind of moved me. He put it in the mouth of us who said, to be or not to be. He was in doubt about something. Whether it was nobler in the mind of man to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, moderation, or to take up arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. And I go for that. If you take up arms, you'll end it. But if you sit around and wait for the one who's in power to make up his mind that he should end it, you'll be waiting a long time. And in my opinion, the young generation of whites, blacks, browns, whatever else there is, you're living at a time of extremism, a time of revolution, a time when there's got to be a change. People in power have misused it, and now there has to be a change, and a better world has to be built, and the only way it's going to be built is with extreme methods. And I, for one, will join in with anyone, don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. Thank you.
Welcome to the Gilchrist Experience. As you see, I always play Malcolm because I show how he evolved over the years. And that was 2 months before his death. And today's subject matter is going to be the prison industrial complex. And we have a member of the family, my family, Wesley Caines, who's just arrived home after 24 years incarcerated. There's, I'm sure, surreal just sitting here because a week earlier you were in prison. Welcome to the show, Wesley Caines.
Thank you.
Welcome,
thank you for having me.
Welcome, my brother.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. I relish the opportunity to share my story, my life, and hope that its impact on anyone, especially anyone who are like the person that I once was, to see what can happen if they don't really take stock and take time to evaluate their choices and their behavior. So thank you for having me.
Well, you know, I introduced you to Victor Pate, who's on the Second Chance Committee at NAN, to get you familiar with how we do things nowadays after being away for 24 years.
Yes.
And you know, we're both involved with National Action Network, so I figure when you come home, you have to get involved with the movement. You know, as you've been away all these years, I'm sure you've kept up with a lot that's happening, and you have a lot of ideas that you know everybody can utilize and be taught the lessons that you've learned. And Victor Pate, tell them how we're going to do something with the Second Chance Committee at NAN.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gilchrist, for having me on your show again. And surely I welcome Brother West home again. And it's just so ironic that just 2 weeks ago we had the pleasure, if you can call it that, unfortunate of the circumstances, to have been exposed to one another's presence, because I was at the Fishkill Correctional Facility from which Brother West was released, and for the purpose of being there for letting those that are incarcerated know that there are resources out there to assist them in their transitional period. And I, as the chairperson of the Second Chance program of the National Action Network, was there to represent NAN on the basis that we have programs, not only programs, but there are other resources that are specifically designed for brothers and sisters coming home to assist them in making the transition from prison back to community, and that the Second Chance program there is there to help bridge the gap from prison to community, to link those that come from prison with the resources in the community to help them re-engage and become familiar with what's going on in the community. and to help them become that positive force that we so badly need in our community, especially from those who have been incarcerated. And that is one of the core function of the Second Chance program at the National Action Network. And I surely look forward to Brother West becoming a part of the National Action Network in addition to the Second Chance program to bring his skills, his stories, and his experience and his energy to make change.
Amen. Amen. And of course, Graham Weatherspoon co-hosts. And what I'd like to do before we go any further, one of the biggest things here is the prison industrial complex and how it's snatching up lives and ruining the community, and it's nothing but a hustle. Modern day slavery. What, 1.3 million people in prison?
2.2 million.
2.2
Yes, the
million
last
people in prison.
Bureau of Justice
All right,
statistics.
let's go to somebody else who's been in prison 30 years. Mamiya. He's speaking about the prison industrial complex, and we'll come back to the show. All right, let's play Mamiya for the 2 minutes that we have.
How do you view the role of prisons in society today?
Remember back when we were young, and we was back during the Vietnam War, we used to talk about the military industrial complex. Well, now you have the prison industrial complex. And you have what is the ultimate solution to America's economic problem. Those who are poor, those who are powerless, those who have no access to the wealth that one needs to survive, and perhaps wealth isn't, but the resources one needs to survive. In an area where there is corporate downsizing and there are no jobs and there is only a service economy and education is being cut, which is the only rung by which people can climb. The only growth industry in this part of Pennsylvania, in the eastern United States, in the southern United States, in the western United States, is quote-unquote corrections, for want of a better word. The corrections industry is booming, and I mean, this joint here ain't 5 years old. Some corporations made a mint off of this thing. This thing cost millions of dollars to be built and constructed. But second to that, you have across the United States, for the first time in modern history, you have small rural counties and districts begging the government, build a prison here, please. There was a time when it was, not in my backyard, you better not. I don't want that here. But now they're talking about, jobs. That's the reality. That's the reality that we're working with. And of course, blacks, Latinos, Hispanics, Mexicans in the West, and Puerto Ricans in the East, and so-called white trash, poor whites, are the raw material now.
No, a little bit more. Now, here's a man that's been on death row for 30 years. Innocent is argumentative whether he's guilty or not, but I understand the gun that was found was a different caliber than the one that killed the officer, as far as I can see. Graham will probably speak on that. But tell us what it's like to come out after all these years, and if you discuss as much as you want about your case, and whatever, wisdom you can pass on to the young folks out here, getting in all kind of ruckuses, or getting involved with the wrong people, or being in the wrong place at the wrong time, which is, I think, this close to what happened to you.
I think that it was very interesting that you opened up with Malcolm X. And now you have Mamiya, that juxtaposition of a Malcolm X who advocated personal responsibility.
Amen.
Transformation and change and bettering oneself.
Right.
And a Mamiya who doesn't necessarily speak against those aspects, but focuses more on the structural inequalities in our society.
Amen.
And for me, that's very important. It's very important because oftentimes we miss the dynamic, the binary dynamic of the issues we face in our communities. And it becomes easier at times for some to argue the structural concern at the exclusion of the personal concern.
Right, right, right.
I think as it relates to me, I take very personal my responsibility for my crime.
Okay.
I acted very poorly. I displayed horrendous judgment. And after the fact of my crime, how I responded showed a profound lack of sensitivity towards my victim and my victim's family. Now, that said, I think it's important that any discussion about bettering our community or a community have a strong component of personal responsibility.
Okay.
The fact of the matter is, we may not want to admit it, but the minority community, and specifically the black community, has really negated its responsibility to its young people.
Okay.
And let's be clear, I'm not placing myself in that category. I was raised with a certain set of values that I turned my back on,
Okay.
which led to my crime and my ultimate incarceration for 24 years. I take responsibility for that.
Okay.
That was a horrendous crime. Someone lost their life, and someone had to pay, and rightfully so, I paid. But I don't lose sight of the fact that in our society, post-civil rights, I believe that there has been the concern in the black community that because we can go anywhere and quote-unquote be anything, that we kind of forgot the home base. And we stopped protecting the home base.
Amen.
When you ask schools to become social work institutions,
Right.
when you ask teachers to raise children,
Right.
to impart values to children, that's a problem. When you have faith communities in our communities that really don't engage the community. You know, we put our heads down and we walk into our churches and our mosques and our synagogues, and if you're inside, you're okay. If you're outside, well, that's those people. They're the other.
Right.
And we're surprised when the other infringes on our lives in a violent way. We then blame those who engaged in antisocial behavior for the fact that they inherited a structureless, a valueless system that they get caught up in. So I think any discussion about change in our community needs to have a strong component of education on the part of young people, and re-education on the part of adults like myself and ourselves about what responsibility we have to the current generation and to those generations that will follow. Before we could blame anyone, we have to take responsibility. Without a doubt, there are structures in place that view and consider black boys particularly, but increasingly black girls, as a threat. And others can engage in antisocial behavior, but they start at a point of redemption. They are redeemable. So when they engage in this behavior, the structure says to them, you are a good person who are making poor decisions. We are going to re-educate you. When minority kids, and specifically black kids, engage in the same types of behavior, it's confirmatory of our less thanness. So I think it's important for us to fight a dual battle against personal responsibility and against structural inequalities.
That's a lesson learned, huh? Wow. That's powerful. Graham?
I have talked with a number of men who've been incarcerated over the years. And I've sent a number of men into the system as a result of their choices and the actions that they engaged in. I was thinking of the last case I worked on before I retired. It was a homicide case. A 17-year-old boy in Brooklyn. He and his partner tried to rob a guy, and the guy wouldn't give it up. He was shot to death. And it took me about 24 hours to get a name and about 3 days to pick him up. 17 years old. And when we sat down, I said to him, and listening to you, we would have made good partners. Because I said to him, what you did was make a very bad decision. I said, you can't change that now. You can't bring that fellow back. He's gone. His family is suffering as a result. I said, but from here on, you have to work on you. All right? Now, what you did was not correct, but what you do from here on can be correct. I said, you're going to spend some time in prison. Unfortunately, you're a young fella. You can't really protect yourself at your age in the state system. So you're going to have to be careful. You have now taken on baggage that you don't really and shouldn't have to deal with. He was sentenced to 17 years, and he was 17 years old. And he was not the shooter. He and the shooter acting in concert, but he didn't even realize the guy had the gun. And that information I got because a certain individual overheard a conversation they were having as they went down the street. And when I arrested him, I said, I know you didn't pull the trigger. And I know you didn't know that he had the gun. But right now, I have to charge you with the homicide just the same. So he got 17 years. He's out now. I haven't seen him since he got out. But the loss of life, and I then had to inform the family of the deceased, you know, about the apprehension. There would be a trial, and then them preparing themselves to just go and sit at the trial. Photographs, autopsy reports, you know, the whole process. And you talk about family, and that's the crux of it.
Really?
And there are a lot of good families, there are a lot of good parents raising their children, but their children make a right turn or a left turn. Because again, it's about decisions. You know, we raise our children, and ultimately they have to make the choices. We can't be with them. And we can only, once we pour into them, we can only pray that they would follow the instructions that we've given. But it's a rough system out there. I remember doing a show with Mumia years ago. I was honored to have done Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman and with Mumia. An outstanding brother. I mean, he is so deep, it's unbelievable. But this system, this complex, Section 5.00 of the New York State Penal Code says, the penal code is not to be strictly construed, but is to be used for the fair and just, and the fair deportment of justice, meaning that a person doesn't have to be held to the letter of the law, having committed an offense. And we see that depending upon who the defendant is. Recently, you heard about a boy who killed somebody, I don't know, somewhere in the country, or whatever it was he did, and they said he was suffering from affluenza. Because he was so affluent, he didn't realize that his actions,
that was a car accident.
Or a car crash or whatever it was, and he killed somebody.
Yeah.
Right. What are you talking? There's no medical condition called affluenza.
It's
But
made up.
he is not serving time
Because he had money.
because he had money. And you have, with the Rockefeller drug laws, we have people sentenced to 10, 15, 20 years for a small amount of cocaine or crack cocaine.
Life in some instances.
And those that have money are not going to prison. Lindsay Lohan, ideal scenario,
Yeah.
in and out of court. But the thing is that with this system, you know, the movie Con Air, which came out 20-something years ago, people thought that was like fiction. No, it's not fiction. They're transporting inmates from one state to another state to finance these prisons across the country. So an individual's arrested in New York and flown to Colorado because they say there's overcrowding here, so we're going to fly you to Colorado. Well, you're denied the opportunity of seeing even your family on a visit. The fact that you could live in Brooklyn or the Bronx and you're sent to Onondaga, to Dannemora, you know, that's an 8-9 hour ride.
Right.
And the expense to get to that location to see a loved one.
Well,
and also, we don't even want to talk about the charges that they rape people with to make a telephone call.
Right.
So
It's a
everybody is making money.
Everybody's making money.
And we incarcerate more people than any nation on the planet.
So what Wesley guided us to is how we should be concentrating on our kids so that their attitudes change. Now, this is the wisdom that you're passing on after 24 years. But how would you approach children? And I mean, you know, if you're put in a position where you can talk to the kids and their attitudes and what you see after, or dealing with the system, or the guys in the system, what's your advice on how to deal with 24 years? I mean, people hear that and they say, how'd you get through that? That's half your life. You're 48 now, and you went in at 24, a young man, locked up for 24 years. That's maddening to any other person. But you went through it, and you're here, and you're sane, and right? And
That's
happy.
debatable. that might be somewhat debatable.
Well, at least
you're
you
okay.
got through it. You know,
Yes,
God
yes.
is good at
Yes.
this point. I mean, was God an important part of all this process?
Well, for me, I'm not necessarily a religious person in the strictest sense of the word, but I've always had good people in my life whose actions were guided by their belief in God.
Okay.
So for me, God has touched me through the people who have
Prayers,
touched my
people
life.
praying? Praying for you.
And I think it's important to, from a personal point of view, you ask me, how did I survive this time? And there were a few things that I told myself when, you know, a few months after conviction, I found myself in a prison cell in Elmira, New York. And I started asking the question, like, how did I end up here? You know, and I mean, the natural response is for you to want to blame someone else besides yourself.
Okay.
And I was fortunate because I had people in my life who would not allow that. And they challenged me and made me see that my condition was of my own making.
Okay.
And once I wrapped my mind around that, I made certain decisions, one of which was I would never buy into the prison culture as normative for me.
Okay.
I would never walk out of prison the same way that I walked in.
Okay.
And any opportunity I get to help anyone who is or was similarly situated to myself, I would do the best I can to help them. And I embraced my rehabilitation. I took every program available. At the time when I first got in, college was in the system.
Yeah,
And
right.
I, for a time, was in the college program, and then the TAP and Pell Grants were removed from prisoners.
Okay.
So there
Oh,
was,
there was a time you got...
yes, there was a time if you had your GED or high school diploma, you can register and attend college or university in the prison system. That was changed in 1995. So there was some time, there was some time, 6 years to be exact, where there was no higher education, but I was fortunate enough to be at that time in Eastern Correctional Facility under a superintendent who, for his position, was very progressive for the times. And he met with several of the more senior population, and he told them, he said, the people who come into this facility to teach you have taught you well, and you have to believe that. And now it's your responsibility to teach the younger guys who are in here. You have information, share it. I will open up the school building to you, and you can have your classrooms, put proposals together, and I will support you. And we did that for 5 or 6 years until the good fortune that a young man who was a senior at Bard College in Dutchess County decided that he, you know, he was on this picturesque campus in the middle of the Hudson Valley, scenic, but over every mountain there were several prisons in this area. And he wanted to find a way that he could bring a liberal arts education into prison in a place that most people would say that he was crazy, but he was persistent. And he founded the Bard Prison Initiative.
What was that?
The Bard College Prison Initiative, BPI. And he came into Eastern in 2000. And by 2001, right after 9/11, we started having courses in the humanities.
Wow.
And slowly but surely, we started building out a college program, which today has over 300 students. And they are a degree granting program. I'm fortunate enough that I was one of the first individuals to enter this program. And was equally fortunate that I had an opportunity to earn a BA in history from Bard College.
History?
Yes, so I was very fortunate, and I understand the role that education plays in transforming lives.
Right.
And to be honest, I think most people do. I think for the policymakers, it's a question of where should that money come from.
Right.
You have a limited pie, a limited tax pie.
Yeah.
And where each dollar and each penny goes is a battleground. Fortunately, the BPI program was privately funded, organizations, wealthy individuals.
Oh, really?
So their structure was different. There's a recent debate taking place amongst the policymakers, including the Governor Cuomo, about bringing college back in. And the question about college being transformative is really off the table. It's about funding. And I'm somewhat disappointed, but really not very surprised that most of the men, and I would imagine the women in the system, come from very particular communities, mostly in New York City.
Right.
You don't really hear a lot from the elected officials in those communities about what prison should be for those people who are going to come back into their communities. They tend to not voice anything. So you have people outside, you know, you spoke about the idea that you have to go to Dannemora or Elmira or Comstock to a prison far away from your family. Well, the decisions to build these prisons, you know, they weren't dictatorial decisions.
No.
They were decisions by policymakers in Albany. And to go back to your original questions about what do we teach our children, I think children require, first of all, trust. They require knowing that the adult who takes an interest in their lives, they can trust. And I can think of no greater way for an adult, particularly an elected official, to say to the young people in their districts that they trust them than to go to Albany and fight for them. And part of fighting for them means getting policies, at least having a debate. Some of the subject matter in the debate that's taking place, I mean, frankly, don't affect the lives of the people who elect them. And people in the community need to demand more. I think there's an entrenchment of an old mentality. And I think you often hear this argument from the president, Barack Obama, you know, as he tried to move the country in a different direction, one of accountability.
Right. Right.
You know, you walk into a polling place and you pull a lever, and that's not it. The person you elect have a responsibility to you.
Right. Right.
And if they're not responsible and accountable to you, then you need to get them out. The idea that a person should have any elected position for decades, I believe, is abhorrent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any single position in government for that long is abhorrent, because I think it's only a matter of time before your interest shifts from those people who you represent to those people who keep you there. And that's a problem.
Become self-centered.
It's interesting how you speak about all this stuff, and you own up to your errors, but we spend little time talking about the people that are innocent, and the people that are really railroaded into these situations.
And there are many.
And
More than most people want to admit. There are many.
And the people that are in prison and what you have to deal with when you're innocent. Right. I just want to go back to Mamiya and play the second half of this interview. And he deals with a lot of the parts that, the humiliation you go through with strip searching. And I wish you would deal with that. And just one other part of Mamiya.
Like the hamburgers at McDonald's, with raw material, would be fed into this. And what you see in Congress and what you see in state houses are the greasing of the conveyor belt on that, you know, that meat patty line. Because there are no laws anymore. Think about it. You know, when you look at the trend of the law, and I mean, analyze the cases, read the cases, and see what they're saying. You don't hear anybody talking about, you know, search and seizure, you know, Fourth Amendment, or any other amendment. What you hear in popular discourse on talk radio stations or in the newspaper is lock them up yesterday, or kill them. You see, and it becomes a political, again, an engine feeding an industry. The prison industrial complex, you see. And it is so naked now, so negative now, that as Monica said, you can have over 1.1 million people in this prison, in these prisons. And you have people saying, well, they need to lock up more people. I mean, you have people actually saying that. Of course they don't know what they're talking about, but they're just following a script that has been laid down to them, you know, by the media, by the politicians. When you spoke about, you know, that, I thought about a recent article that was in the New York Times. You may have seen it, by Saul Wachtler, who used to be the presiding chief judge of the New York Court of Appeals. And I laughed when I read it. I really did. I had a belly laugh. Because here was a guy who was, for all intents and purposes, a hanging judge. And if somebody, you know, made a claim before his court, well, you get nothing. Shot people down like, you know, it was fun. But in his article, he talked about the difference between reading a brief about an inmate who sued about the humiliation of strip searching and going through that experience himself, and how devastated he was by it. But every one of those 1.1 million people, and I mean, increasingly, when you look at least across the country now, you don't have to go to prison to go through that humiliation. You can go to your average police station down the block. You know, someone gets arrested for a traffic violation, a ticket, and men and women are being strip searched in every city of America. You see what I'm saying? So, you know, when he was in a position of power, and he could have said, this is unconstitutional, or it violates the same. Doesn't make a claim. Next, denied. And he didn't sense how wrong, how cold-hearted that was, until it was him that had to spread his buttocks. It was him who had to pull his penis back. And you understand what I'm saying? It became a whole other reality. You know, Jamaicans have a saying, who feels it, knows it. Well, now he knows it. A little too late though, man.
Mumi Abu Jamal.
Oh, that's heavy. That's heavy. But now I'm sure you've had, how many times did you have to go through that humiliation? In 24 years.
It's a part of prison life.
Right.
It's one part, and there's several parts of prison life that one never gets used to. And that's just one part of prison life that one doesn't get used to. I like to always balance, because this is a very controversial thing, even while I was in, and I've only been home a week, but
right.
There are issues within the prisons that are not necessarily being addressed or being addressed timely. There are individuals who have substance abuse problems.
Right.
And if you focus only on the strip search, you miss the reason why strip searching has become a necessity in the system.
Okay, I got you.
It is a necessity because I would like to see my family. I would like to touch my family.
Right, right, right.
Is an issue in the system because staff don't necessarily get paid what they would like to be paid, or a living wage at times that could provide for themselves and their family. So there are many opportunities for an individual who is inside to provide some financial support to his family at the expense of those who have substance abuse problems.
Okay.
There's an opportunity for a staff member to earn extra income by bringing in contraband. So when you speak about strip searching is the symptom. The disease is substance abuse. And the fact that the system is just incapable of addressing substance abuse on a large enough scale to make any impact in contraband coming into the prison system. There's another similar situation taking place that's very, very, very important for people to understand. There's a large population of men and women inside the system who have diagnosed and undiagnosed mental health issues.
Okay. Yeah.
And those individuals are incapable at times of self-control and are incapable at times of handling the strict environment of a punitive prison.
Okay.
They run afoul of prison rules, and they are confined mostly individually. And before you are confined, you are strip searched. So again, if you focus simply on the strip searching, you miss the disease, because the disease is substance abuse and mental impairment that have to be addressed. Prison has become a dumping ground for a lot of social ills. And yesterday I was at Columbia University where they had a conference on public health and incarceration. And this was a part of that conference. The idea that, you know, society has, for the lack of a better term, over the past 15 years have become incapable of dealing with the rise in alienation and mental illness in the population. So many health issues, public health issues, have been criminalized, and individuals are being placed in the system. Correction staff is not qualified to really deal with individuals who have mental health issues. And most correction staff are totally unprepared to deal with someone who's dealing with substance abuse issues.
Wow.
So, yes, strip searching is definitely dehumanizing. It's something that one can never, ever get used to. But I think it speaks to a larger problem that's starting to get some attention shown on it. But I think that it's something to pay attention to in the future.
And speaking
Victor,
to
how
that,
many years did you spend in?
15.
15.
Yeah, 15. And I'm glad that he brought up the issue with regards to conditions in prison as it relates to people who are oftentimes develop mental issues while they are incarcerated.
I would think so.
Because a person can come in a prison pretty much in a sane state of being, and after long-term exposure to the prison conditions in itself and what goes on and witnessing the things that happen within prison, can develop these mental issues, which can also develop into a substance abuse problem to help medicate themselves and insulate themselves against what's going on in the prison itself. One of the things that I can definitely say for sure, and speaking to mental health issues that can often occur or often develop in prisons, is that you have prison conditions and rules and regulations that you're not supposed to violate. A lot of them is a bunch of nothing, just made up stuff. Sort of like to keep you in line, to keep you in place, to keep you remembering that you're in confinement, that someone is in charge of you, so you have to be on your best behavior. So oftentimes you can get a ticket. A ticket could lead to a keep lock, which basically means 24-hour confinement to your cell. Depending on the severity and level of the particular ticket, you might even get solitary confinement. Solitary confinement is definitely one of the most profoundest things that can happen to you in prison. Imagine being in prison, already in confinement, and then being put in further confinement that will place you in a situation or circumstance by which you are no longer in what they consider general population. Now you're in a more contained population where you are not around your everyday people. You're not around people that you can have an opportunity to speak with, people to talk with, people to engage with, people to do various things that you are able to do while you're in prison, which is one of the things that can further help deteriorate a person's mental state of being. And I know Wes is familiar with...
Have you ever been in this?
Huh?
Have you ever had
Of course.
solitary
Yes,
confinement?
of course I've had
You,
it.
Wes?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I've had it, yeah. And unfortunately, I wasn't there for like,
Did you lose it?
over 60, no.
Okay.
Not to that point where, I couldn't function once I got out, but of course there were times that I, found myself, trying to find a conversation with myself.
Okay.
Find myself counting all of the rivets in the cell, you know what I'm saying, counting the lines on the floor, and little things like that there, because I had to keep my mind active, and whatever was available for me at that particular time is what I would focus on. But more particularly, speaking to the mental health issue is the fact that especially conditions in prison as they are today and as they were when I was there. And it has not gotten better. It is not getting better. As a matter of fact, it's getting worse. And the reason why it is not getting any better, one of the things that Brother West spoke about, is that there's not enough conversation about what's going on in prison. Okay. Prison is a hidden environment where it's a wall there for a reason. Not only to keep people in, but it's also there to keep people out. So just as well as the people are inside being confined, there are people that are outside that are being kept from finding out what's going on inside. And I can tell you from a person from being inside, and now that I am on the outside, that is, there are so many things that go on inside that public has no idea, that once they get their hands on you, once you become a prisoner, an inmate, you're just about open to anything that they would want to do to you in there.
That leads up to the people, the correction officers. I mean, what limits their insanity? I mean, they're locked up too.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're going and dealing with a whole environment that's restrictive, and they are the law of the land. I mean,
they got too much power.
The police officer here.
Correction has, if I may, correction has a very high turnover rate.
Okay.
Very high turnover rate in New York City.
Okay.
Of all the law enforcement agencies, they have the highest turnover rate. They have the highest rate of people who wind up crossing the line and winding up, instead of walking the hall, they're in the cell.
Account.
Not taking the count, they're part of the count.
Right.
You know, and I was here in Manhattan one day and stopped a guy flashed his shield, he was getting on the train, and I said, I walked over to him, engaged him in a conversation. It was very evident to me that he wasn't a police officer, because there's certain there's certain terms that you would know. And I asked him for the shield he had. It was a police officer's shield, but it wasn't his, because he wasn't a police officer.
Right.
He was a former correction officer who had been terminated by the Department of Correction because he was bringing contraband into Rikers Island, just as he's talked about.
Yeah.
All right. So I arrested him. The shield belonged to his brother, who was vacationing out of the country. And when the brother got home, he calls me to see what we could do. I said, what we could do? What you need to do is get off the phone. Because Internal Affairs is coming for you next. All right? There was a case we worked on in June. A partner and I, we were out in Queens. We worked that case. Closed the case. Guy sent away. And a few years later, we have the same pattern crime going on in Long Island City. So, man, that sounds like so-and-so. We check in and out. He's in, but he's in downstate in Queens. He went upstate. They sent him back down to downstate on Van Dam in Long Island City. So we go and park ourselves outside, and downstate is a work release. So in the morning, guys come out, they go look for jobs, they come back in the afternoon. And sure enough, we see him coming out of the facility. We follow him over to the number 7 train, into Manhattan, all around. A couple hours we're following him. And he doesn't know we're following him, but we watch him as he robs a woman at Greenpoint Avenue on the G. And he runs into the tunnel. So we take care of the lady, said, don't worry, we know who that guy is. We drive back to the facility and we wait for him to show up. He shows up late in the afternoon, as though he's been out looking for work. And we walk up to him, hey, he said, hey, Spoon, Dotton, how you doing? All right, listen, we want to talk to you. We see you back here at the facility. He says, yeah. We want to talk to you about the lady at Greenpoint Avenue. He just dropped his head. He just put his hands out. We cuffed him. What was the problem? Addiction.
Okay.
And he told us that there are more drugs in downstate than there were on the street. So he was stealing money on the street to come back into the facility to purchase the drugs that he needed for his habit. So here is a guy that is already, you know, he's on a teeter-totter. He's already tipped over. And now where he's spending his time, drugs are being distributed in the facility.
Yeah.
Right? How do people get help? I had to stop some officers. They're trying to restrain a guy. I said, what are you doing? Put your nightsticks up. Oh, we can't get. I said, this is not Germany. We don't beat up mentally ill people.
Right.
I said, put your nightsticks up and get off the train. Now, I talked to the guy. I uncuffed him and walked him off the train in the rush hour, the 5 o'clock rush hour. But there is a group of people who approached Ray Kelly a couple years ago about the treatment of emotionally disturbed people by police officers.
Yeah.
They're not qualified to engage. Rosario, a gentleman in Brooklyn, was on a ledge, a second floor ledge, naked in Bed-Stuy on Tompkins Avenue
Oh,
a
I
few years
remember
ago.
that one.
Remember that case?
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
A friend of mine videoed it.
A stun gun.
They hit him with a stun gun. He said he didn't want any white cops. He says, I only want to talk to a black police officer. Now, the guy is naked. It's obviously he's not in his right mind.
Yeah.
He's on a window ledge.
Yeah.
They tasered the guy while they escorted his mother around the corner to talk to her, said, we're going to take care of your son, don't worry. When they come back, he's dead. When she comes back around the corner, his skull is split open on the
Yeah, he
sidewalk.
fell off the
How do you
second floor.
tase a person who's emotionally disturbed and then you don't have anything set up to catch him when he
Yeah.
falls? When they could have waited, find a black police officer, let him come, talk the guy down. What happens now? One of the two, I think the sergeant, wound up blowing his brains out because he realized
That's right.
that the order
That's
that he
right.
gave,
That's right.
you know, somebody lost their life.
Right.
And it didn't
So
have to happen.
all of these
Yeah,
things,
yeah, I
solitary
remember that.
confinement is inhumane.
Yeah.
They just brought this GI home from Afghanistan.
Oh,
All right, and they talked about they could see certain conditions in him. So, what happens to a guy sitting in solitary by himself for 6 months? The human experience is an experience with other human beings, not with concrete and steel. If you have a newborn baby, or you just have a baby in a bassinet, if you don't touch that baby will die in 7 days. The baby has to have the
Human
physical
contact.
contact.
yeah.
That is a
contact.
necessity of life.
After coming out of the womb for 9
So
months.
as we deal with, you know, you're still a human being. That's what I told that 17-year-old fellow. I said, look, you made a mistake. Now is the time to correct and move forward. So we can't further beat people down. Call them names, this, that, and the other. No, you're no good, you're low life, you're this and that. You're a savage, it's a wolf pack, all this stuff. We need to recognize where we've made all of us need to own up to what
Absolutely.
we've done wrong. Whether we're in jail or on the street,
That's
we're
true.
all doing
Absolutely.
wrong.
Level of
Absolutely.
And then
responsibility.
assess ourselves and realize, well, you know, that wasn't too cool. I shouldn't have done that. If you can, go back and apologize to the person you. Scripture says, go back and apologize, ask forgiveness, so that healing can begin, and then you go on. Because the person you are today should not be the person you were 5 or 10
That's for
years
sure.
ago. And the educational program, and I want to talk to you about that because there's certain politicians we need to get behind to push for that.
Absolutely.
Bard College is one of the best educational, one of the best higher learning centers in this state. And they, conversely, they do a program with high school students.
Absolutely. Early high school, early
And
college.
when they graduate from high school, they have an associate's degree.
Absolutely. They do great work.
So,
It's a part of the culture of the school, this idea that you give back. Let me just go back for 1 second and speak about, because you brought up the serviceman who the president made that swap for to get him out of,
Yeah.
out of Afghanistan. And by nowhere am I comparing a person who engages in personal choice and behavior and go to prison with someone who put their life on the line for us and the lifestyle that we enjoy.
Right.
But I think that it's important, and I'm a big advocate, that I don't care if you have spent 1 year or 24 years or 20 or better in prison. I think everyone coming out of the correctional setting, it should be mandated that you get counseling.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Because it is a very
It's simple,
traumatic experience, and a lot of us, our egos and our pride will not allow us to think that we have been impacted by that experience.
Right.
The fact of the matter is, you cannot live a certain way for decades and not be impacted by that experience. And I think that it's a disservice to just have men and women who have done long stretches come back to society and not be mandated that they be debriefed. Because there's a lot of repressed anger because of the conditions inside.
Of course.
And there's a lot of issues that must be worked out above and beyond just simply connecting with your family. So I'm an advocate for that. There was something else that you mentioned that I wanted to speak about, but I kind of
Addressing certain politicians?
Yes.
Yeah.
And this idea of education. I think that I'm an advocate for it. I know the transformation from firsthand experience, so I believe in it. I think that if you have, we have to have a conversation about what is the purpose of a correctional institution in the state of New York.
It's not about correcting.
And if we say that a correctional institution is part punitive and part rehabilitative, then we really need to get more behind the rehabilitative.
For sure.
And a big component of rehabilitation is an education.
And just
We're
to
running out
add,
of time.
Yeah.
But you're going to have to promise to come back and
Yeah.
often because
Yes.
you just made us aware of something we were suspect of all the time. And to hear you speak today is a joy, and I'm so proud of you, Wes.
Thank you.
This has
Thank
really
you.
been I mean, really.
I've always
Wes,
appreciated your support.
I mean,
You are one of my
I've
safety
been
net.
up to prison with Wes, and it was
Yes.
always, I always had fun, man. You was always accepted to what I'd heard.
I wouldn't exactly
I mean, I always had
determined
fun.
but it was a
fun for
pleasure
me.
having you, but
Well, it was always joyful,
Yes,
and
yes.
it was not depressing. And when you think about going to prison, that's what I think.
oh yeah, absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
it was always a joy, and I'm so glad to see you. And
Yes.
you have to come back. Matter of fact, we might even get you your own show.
Yeah.
no,
one of the
he
producers.
needs
We're
that
on.
platform.
But
Oh, no, we're not.
you know, I'm going to
One
do
minute.
a roll in here, the last minute here. But the God in me loves the God in you, and we're going to introduce the Boys and Girls Club of Harlem, and just give you a little, minute to watch what we're doing here in Harlem. And hopefully Wes can come guide us without you. Thank you for
Okay.
coming.
Thank
God
you for
bless.
having us.
Are we off?
History was
No.
my major.
For many kids, a brighter future is within view, but not within reach. The Boys and Girls Clubs help kids cross the street to a better world. In fact, most of the kids here will go on to college, but there are still thousands more who need that opportunity. With your help, they can have a bright future instead of just seeing it through a window. Support a program that works. Support the Boys and Girls Clubs, the positive place for kids.